tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana ki ngā tangata o ngā hauwhā o te ao nui. My name is Donna Kerridge. I am a first generation New Zealander on my father's side. I am a 28th generation New Zealander of Maori and Waikato Tainui descent on my mother's side. And just to show off, she's one of 29, so we think we own half the coast. I stand in front of you today as the living embodiment and the face of my collective ancestries, who have sacrificed much so that my life might be full and rewarding, and so that I am able to continue the work they set in motion many, many years ago. I have the privilege to work in my community and across the globe as a traditional Māori healer, Indigenous people's advocate and contracted spokesperson, as we heard before, for the National Collective of Rongoā Māori practitioners, Te Kāhui Rongoā. I would like to share with you today the ancestral philosophy that supports my practice of traditional Māori healing, and to offer you a brief insight into my personal spiritual journey. I forgot to show off my whānau pictures. So you'll see there in the bottom right-hand corner my English whānau. Here are my Māori ancestors through the Waikato, my mountain at the bottom, things that are very important and dear to my spiritual context. The river, the river that cares for us, and my marae, and our original marae, the very old and dilapidated looking house on the side that I grew up in. So many of us study a multitude of religions, philosophies and cultures without an understanding of the philosophies that relate to this land. So my job tonight is to try and introduce some of those things to you for those who don't already know them. The land that we have collectively chosen as our new home has its own way of speaking to us. So we have a lot to learn from those who have inhabited this land for more than 800 years, and their accumulated knowledge, born of bearing witness over more than 20 consecutive generations to her repeating cycles and the intricate web of interconnectivity that exists uniquely on this land. We have an opportunity to access the timeless stories of this land through the eyes of its Indigenous population, to see, touch, taste, smell, and come to know the gifts of this special place, and to share in that time-honoured knowledge. Many people throughout the world are now acknowledging and appreciating the fine balance between the physical, mental, and spiritual aspects of our existence, and our undeniable interconnectedness to the land and the universe, as is taught by Indigenous cultures throughout the world. So perhaps in the 1800s, when New Zealand was first colonised, those who had already lost touch with their own indigeneity considered the belief systems of Indigenous populations to be uncivilised and riddled with superstition. Mātauranga Māori, traditional Māori knowledge, defined as the knowledge, comprehension or understanding of everything visible and invisible existing in the universe, and is often synonymously used with the word wisdom. Lived traditional knowledge engenders understanding, tolerance and compassion in our search for universal truths. It stimulates empathy for people that we have never met, but whose plight we identify with. Technology is helping create a renewed sense of spirituality and identity beyond racial, religious, national and ethnic identities and our once limiting geographic borders. New technologies have provided an unprecedented opportunity to connect global Indigenous populations and like-minded communities of interest to influence the conversation. As a result, it would seem that the balance of power is shifting, and achieving critical mass to change the current trajectory of a globally polluted and exploited land and seascape is now possible. At a time when the world appears to be gripped in chaos, war, terrorism, racism, poverty, global warming or pollution, and social injustice, there does remain hope. The ability to transcend the physical limitations of our existence and embrace our spiritual connections, to inspire the hope of a different reality is on the table for us. We only need to choose it. So no matter where I've travelled in the world, the principles of Indigenous healing are the same. The words, the plants, the methods might differ, but the philosophy doesn't seem to change. They undoubtedly share common threads. If you look at this wheel, the global healing practices, for me the rim reflects what most of us see as the point of difference between our different practices. So for example, I've often thought I'd really like to be a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner because I just love needles. So acupuncture I think I'd be really good at. My family are not convinced. But these are all the things that define our differences, our point of difference. But if we look at each of the wedges, for me, they reflect the history and evolution of the distinct philosophies. The things that we don't always put out the front, because it's our points of difference that we tend to certificate. So, if you are a traditional Chinese practitioner or an acupuncturist, you get to know all the meridians and things like that, and where to stick your needles, and all the other important things that you need to know, and then you spend 10 hours on the philosophy and history, 101 TCM. For me, it kind of needs to be flipped around. But anyway, and the centre reflects the shared principles of all of those different ways of healing. And in none of these practices are we, humankind, at the centre of the universe. That centre of that wheel represents to me Mother Earth, Gaia, or Papa Tuanuku, as I know her to be. It's never the people. So to understand healing from a Māori perspective, it's important that we can grasp three concepts. I don't represent all Māori, but I represent the teachers who have taught me. I need to share with you my interpretation of tikanga, of mauri, and of wairua. So for me, tikanga are our terms of engagement with the earth and with each other and our communities. Tikanga are the rules by which we engage. They are what keep us safe. They are the rules into which we must conduct ourselves that are culturally appropriate, our culturally appropriate health and safety plan. Mauri, for me, is the gift of life. All things have a mauri, a life essence. It's like a zipper that binds the physical to the spirit in order to maintain balance, so we don't go too far one way or the other. So the whole idea for me of Rongoā Māori, traditional Māori healing, is to lift the mauri in others. The other word that you see on the screen is wairua. For me, wairua is the world of connections. We are the living face of our ancestors, including all those that came before us, the plants, the birds, and everything else that was in existence before we were, everything else that created our possibility. We are the living embodiment of our tupuna. They're not gone, and our healing is empowered by their presence. Nothing exists or grows in isolation, including us. Nothing heals in isolation, and especially not us. For every action we take, there is a reaction. Every single thing that we do, say, or think matters. Just because people can't see our thoughts doesn't mean they don't exist, and doesn't mean they don't have an impact. We are the straw which wairua, the greatness and ancestral healing energy, passes. We are not the healers. We are simply the vessels through which healing passes, if we allow ourselves to be. There are a number of other healing concepts that are important to our practice. I've just chosen a few that stand out the most. The first is manaakitanga, often translated as hospitality. But for me, manaakitanga means to elevate the mana of our visitors and others, to lift them above ourselves, to build up their mana, to give them the very best that we have to share. Another healing concept or practice that we use is whanaungatanga. Whanaungatanga is kind of translated to genealogy, and while that's correct, I think it's more about acknowledging our connections to all of those that have gone before, not just our human connections. The third one is kotahitanga. For me, kotahitanga is that we work as one. We all have our contribution to make. Our achievements are the product of the whole. Kaitiakitanga. For me, it is the act of caring and protecting the well-being of others, of special knowledge, and of Mother Earth, Papa Tūnuku. Whakapapa reminds us that we are the living embodiment of those that have gone before. Without them, we are nothing. So Māori healing is the oldest medical practice in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But I'd like to remind you that no Māori ever migrated to New Zealand. We were Pacific Island peoples looking for a better life. When we arrived here, we had to name every tree. We had to find a word for every bird. We had to find a new name or a name for every river, for every bend in every river, for every mountain, for everything that was new to us. Of that became Te Reo Māori, the Māori language. We became Māori. We weren't Māori when we arrived. And what made us Māori was the land. It is the land that created our language. And without our land, our language makes no sense. Our culture makes no sense. If you take away the land and you take away everything that it means to be Māori. So rongoā is not about disease, or Māori healing is not about disease. Its focus is on well-being, not on cure. It is about restoring moti to the people and equally the land. It is about re-establishing our connections with nature. Nature is our blueprint for health. All things are connected. Many of us are born and bred city folk. And for us sometimes that can mean we don't like the rain on our face, least of all in our hair. We don't like the mud in our toes. And we refer to God's creatures as creepy crawlies. How detached have we become from our family? To me, disease is born of derangement of natural law, nature's order. Healing is about restoring the core values and natural laws, LORES, eroded by social and economic demands in a modern society. We live in a society that values independence over interdependence, and as a consequence, we are losing our connections and therefore our well-being. Well-being is a way of living in community, human and nature-filled. It is not a one-size-fits-all, quick fix, one-time event. It is a way of living and understanding the world. Rongoā Māori or traditional Māori healing has a number of practices that we associate with it. This is but a small sample because remember, everything is connected, so therefore everything heals. We need you to go out there and learn from as many people as you can. Discern what sits well with you and create your way of healing in a way that is true to who you are. Karakia for me is more than prayer. It is often translated as prayer because that's probably the closest English word that we can use. But for me, karakia is more than prayer. Karakia is a way of binding us as a group. It is a way of creating a moti that belongs uniquely to that group. It is a way of protecting us as we work together. It is a tool that we use to help connect us more readily to our ancestors so that we can prepare and execute the learning or the healing that we've come together to do. Mirimiri and romi are traditional Māori forms of bodywork. For me, Māori bodywork is much more than clever massage techniques, soft tissue manipulation or joint mobilisation. For me, our bodywork is about connecting to soul. Our bodywork is about ensuring that we reconnect with every cell of our existence, so it's not always pleasant, and so that we can truly appreciate the context in which we exist. We have a number of other forms of bodywork that we do as well, but those are the two that you'll hear most of. We have different forms of bodywork to help prepare for a baby to be born. We have forms of bodywork that help people to prepare to die so that their body can be in a correct state for the mourning procedures that we have. After people have passed, we have special bodywork that we use to help them on their journey. So our bodywork is much, much more than soft tissue manipulation and joint mobilisation. Much, much more. Matikatea are the people amongst us who have the gift of second sight. These people are much more than clairvoyants. For them, or for us, it is their ability to transcend the veil and access our ancestral library of knowledge for the benefit of all. Many of our people in prisons, particularly our young ones, Māori being at the top of the list, are matikatea. They are matikatea who have not had the luxury of elders to recognise that gift in them, to put their arm around them and to say, come with me, let me help you. Let me help you make the best possible use of this gift. But matikatea is another way that we heal. Toi Māori, Māori arts, is another way that we heal. I'm sure that there won't be anybody in this room who wouldn't appreciate the gift of a beautiful voice in terms of healing. And we have a tohunga, somebody who is an expert, who once said sometimes the best massage you can give, the best healing through miri you can give, is through the kind words that you speak to each other. We have our taonga pōro, our special musical instruments. One of them is the Pukaya. It's a big trumpet-like instrument. We use that Pukaya, among other things, to help with the birthing of children. So as a child is coming into the world and coming down the birth canal, the Pukaya is played into the child's fontanelle, so that child will forever know its whakapapa and where it belongs. Our musical instruments are also our healing instruments. Rongoā rākau, often translated as plant medicines, for me is much more than lotions and potions. It is about helping people reconnect to nature. It's about restoring the moti of our natural world. It's not about brown bottle medicine that I was taught when I trained. When I initially trained in another modality, there we learned about the amazing qualities of golden seal. If you took me outside, I couldn't tell you what it was. Brown bottle medicine for me. Mine is about being able to touch, feel, see how the plants grow, see the special gift that they contribute to their natural community, and then I will know how to use them. For me, the things that I see most often repeating at the bottom of our appalling wellbeing statistics are first and foremost loneliness. When we are lonely, we choose different foods, we exercise differently, and sometimes through indiscretions that we don't know how to heal, we withdraw even more, both spiritually and physically. Hopelessness. When people lack hope, this is where we see people with addictions. And sadly, it is where we see youth suicide. Homelessness. And I don't mean the government's definition of 4 walls, a roof and warm, dry homes. I mean knowing where you belong. For Māori, that is our tūranga waiwai. And it is important to us. Knowing where and how you belong is extremely important to your well-being. The 4th most common thing I see is people who lack a purpose beyond meeting their and their family's own immediate needs. What is it that you contribute to your community? And they don't have to be gifts of grandeur. For me, ill health is a social issue long before it is a medical issue. We heal by nourishing the body, mind and spirit, not controlling them or destroying them. We empower by sharing our healing knowledge rather than withholding it in order to assert our individual self-importance. We offer new perspectives and inspirations by opening the doors to the spirit world. Again, we are not the healers. Nature and the world of connections are the healers. We are little more than the vessels of healing. As Māori healers, we rely heavily on our senses, our soul senses, a concept posed by Joy Bell, our pūmanawa, our intuition, our tūhono, our connectedness, our aroha, our love and empathy, our tiakitanga, our guardianship and our protection, and utu, our notion of reciprocity, as well as the more widely recognised senses of sight, hearing, touch, taste and smell. For me, rongoā Māori, or the Māori art of healing, is loosely translated to sense. Rongoā being of the senses. Nature is our blueprint for healing. Know the special gifts of the land. When we know how to heal the bark on a tree, we learn how to protect our skin. Trees live in communities. They need each other in order to remain strong when subjected to the elements. Our ancestors knew the language of the land. They knew the best time to harvest plants, such as kawakawa, and they knew when not to harvest plants, such as kumaraho. I was really fortunate earlier last year to participate, and don't all hiss at me, in a genetic modification internship at Waikato University. And the only reason I went on it, because as a advocate for things Māori at a policy level with the Ministry of Health and MB and other organisations, I'm the one sitting in the corner with my arms crossed going, no way, no how, not on my shift. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned that I don't have the right to tell a family who might suffer from a condition, and the one that comes to mind is Huntington's disease, to say that by reversing the DNA on a single gene can prevent that being passed down through families. Who am I to say that that family cannot access that? Don't get me wrong, I'm not in favour of it, but at the same token, I learned a little bit of humility. But more importantly for me, some of the tikanga, some of the practices that our ancestors had can be explained through genetics. So I was always taught that kawakawa, one of our healing plants, is always to be harvested as the sun is heating up. Well, all these scientists told me that's because it activates certain genes. The heat activates certain genes in those plants. I think that it's important that we look at all perspectives. We don't shut ourselves off to things just because no way, no how, not on my watch, doesn't feel right to me to be playing around with our native plants like that. And I do still think that way, but I am a little more humble in my approach. For me, our ancestors knew the healing capacity of Ngāti Mahuta, the guardian of the forest, of Tangaroa, the guardian of the sea, and ngā maunga tupuna, our mountains. And I tell this to our rangatahi, our young people, all the time. When you feel overwhelmed, let the mauri of the bush, let the mauri of the sea, let the mauri of your ancestral mountain envelop and heal you. Go sit, go be in their presence. Do not ask for anything, do not take anything, just be, and they will heal you. These special places have a mauri, they have a healing mauri, and they can see inside to what we need, and they can share their resources to offer that healing to us. As science advances, Indigenous healing practices are looking less and less flaky. Epigenetics, traditional Māori knowledge relating to intergenerational trauma, for example, are one and the same study. Natural gene suppression, as I talked about before, and activation are part of Māori tikanga in terms of when. How is it that Māori knew that Saturn had rings around her? Her Māori name is Parearo, the ring of leaves. How is it that people could travel backwards and forwards across vast oceans to find Aotearoa and their way back home without a GPS, without a map of the Pacific, a compass, or heaven forbid a sextant? How is it that we can know things that we have never been taught? My ancestors, Maori and Celtic, were also able to apply their intimate knowledge of the land and the special gifts of specific flora to discern which plants to use to relieve discomfort associated with certain physical health conditions. For example, the trees that heal the land after it has been scorched by fire, like kumaraho, were also the very plants that would heal human conditions inflicted by fire, burns, respiratory issues associated with smoke inhalation. Māori, like all Indigenous cultures, share a spiritual connection with the land that has sustained them for many generations. Call it intuition, call it unconscious bias, wairua, we all have it. We just need to relearn how to connect to the living world around us, rather than trying to master it. Rongoā Māori to me is the study of the world of connections, endless ripples born of cause and effect, based on centuries of observation and complex reoccurring patterns, or as we refer to it, maramataka. Māori perspectives on health and wellbeing are important because they provide culturally appropriate wellbeing solutions for the people of this land. They add to a modern knowledge repository of healing and bring centuries of old science back to the light for all to access. There have been many times in my lifetime when things have happened that science would struggle to explain. In the beginning, I consigned these things to the uki spooky corner, but with gratitude for the fact that something actually worked, even if I had no idea how. The reality of the healing power of wairua, our spiritual ancestral connections, was too big a leap for me to confidently make in my early days. I tried not to think or speak about these things in case people thought I was crazy, but as time passed and such instances continued to randomly occur, I started to pay more attention to them. The answers to these questions, and the workings of wairua and spirit, for the most part, still elude me. But one thing is for sure, they were real. I know that, and I know that miracles do happen, and I know that miracles are just things that science has yet to explain. And the more we acknowledge the spiritual aspect, the easier it is to connect to and facilitate healing more readily. There are many things that I know that I don't recall ever having learnt in my lifetime. I believe that I know these things through the spiritual connection to my ancestors, to the land, and to all who have gone before me. Just for a moment, and my intention is not to offend anybody, just for a moment, consider the notion that Mother Earth and God, whoever we might define as our supreme being, were one and the same. Would we treat her any differently? Traditional knowledge is only of value when it is used. We must use it to bring it back to life, to the land, and therefore to the people. Traditional healing practices are a way of belonging to the world. They are not a treatment. They are about putting our roots deep down in the earth in order to sustain ourselves. It is through doing that that we derive our knowing of infinite potential. As the world's inhabitants unite and begin to act in the interests of the planet and the right to survival of all its inhabitants, the masses are initiating a powerful and unstoppable landslide that will overwhelm and assume the assumed and immoral rights of businesses and individuals to exploit and pollute the planet's resources with no regard for the plethora of other species and people who depend on them for their survival, and the insatiable appetite of corporations to compete, to expand, and to accumulate wealth and power for the few who foster their growth. For we are now entering a real time of consequence. I implore you to use your gifts to reconnect with our wider family in our natural world and use our communal wisdom to shine a light on our infinite spiritual capacity. Our well-being is predicated by the well-being of all others in our global tribe. Our interconnectedness and ability or inability to act with one heart, one breath, and one world will determine our destiny.